Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
Okay, welcome. I'm Edwin Rutsch, founding director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'd like to give you a warm welcome to our first panel discussion of our year-long conference on how we can build a culture of empathy and compassion. We're just getting started with this conference, and this is our very first panel. And this is a trial run that we're doing with some members of our empathy curriculum development team. And as convener of this conference, I'm immensely pleased to introduce Mutima Imani, who has graciously agreed to moderate this panel discussion. So without further ado, take it away, Mutima.
Oh, good morning, and thank you, Edwin. So my name is Mutima Imani, and I'm the moderator today, and I have two distinguished panelists with me. I have Sherry Mccready and Ilene Fortune. And so let's go ahead and get started. We're talking today about how to build a culture of empathy. And I'd like to start with having each of our panelists talk about what empathy means to you and maybe share a short story about what brings you to the topic of empathy. Who would like to go first? Sherry?
Okay. You volunteered.
I volunteered. I smiled. Yeah, I mean, I think what empathy means to me is being in a place within myself where I have space to be connected with myself and the people I'm with in a way where I can see my own humanity and the humanity of others. And I have a number of times that I can think of where I've experienced that in various ways, but I think one of the sweetest memories I have is being in the classroom working with young people, 12 and 13-year-old people in our Spanish language learning classroom. And when I began to really consciously start to think about what it was I was wanting at any given time in the classroom, and also thinking about what it was the students were really wanting from a human kind of point of view, seeing us together in community in the classroom, and which was different from using my structural authority as a teacher or seeing what they ought to be doing as students. It was a really different kind of shift. And so I started to communicate how I was feeling, actually, to students, and why I was feeling that way within myself. It wasn't that they were causing it, but it was that there was something within me that I was wanting, and then also when I was looking at that with them as well, and saying, well, gosh, are you are you frustrated at this point? Are you guys needing to take a rest and maybe play a little bit before we continue? As an example. But I remember one day, because we worked on this pretty consciously, and we learned it because we were learning Spanish. We learned some of the words for how we're feeling and what we're wanting in Spanish. And so I just remember one day, though, their books were all on the floor, and it was getting to the end of the period, and I really wanted. I was feeling frustrated about that, and I said, "I'm so frustrated. What am I wanting? I don't know. These books. It's so bugging me." And most of the kids in the class were like, "Senora Mccready, are you needing order?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's it." And they just put their books away, and it was just so playful and sweet, and I really felt a lot of companionship among us all, and so that's one of many, but that's a big one for me.
What a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. So you've experienced the empathy with students in the classroom. That's remarkable. Remarkable. Okay, thank you. Ilene, would you like to share?
Sure, mine is school related as well. Connected to my childhood and being a very quiet, sensitive kind of little girl who never quite felt like I had a place to fit in. And there was a lot of sarcastic fun making in my family. And so by the time I went to school, I learned how to be invisible so that I wouldn't have to be targeted that way. And that lasted, I think, all through my school career, and it was miserable. When I was in college, I came across a mediation program and started doing mediation work with high school students in San Francisco, and that was really eye-opening, learning about empathy through connecting with people on the basis of feelings. Later, I came across Marshall Rosenberg's work, Nonviolent Communication, and that was a really concrete version of empathy that has informed, I think, a lot of my understanding of what it is. So it's really similar to what Sherry said, actually. It's connecting with people from the heart. It's understanding that as humans, we have in common a collection of needs, and all of our behaviors in any moment are reaching to meet those needs to belong, needs for order, like Sherry said, needs for respect and understanding and to be seen and to be heard. And while we might have different ways of trying to meet those needs, underneath our different ways of meeting those needs, we're all trying to do the same thing. And so when we can connect heart to heart, it's about space to be who we are with what's going on in the moment, and to fully accept another person for what they're struggling with and who they are in the moment. I think it's about keeping our hearts soft and being willing to hear each other without judgment. And so I brought that work into elementary schools, and I remember one of my first years doing that, I was working with a classroom of kindergartners, and at the end of the year we were talking about how we could take the experience we had together of safety and acceptance and hearing each other out into the world over the summer. And I remember one little girl raised her hand and she said, you know what, if I give that experience to one person, and then they give it to one person, and then those people give it to other people, just think what could happen in the whole world. And I was like, yeah, you're 5 years old, and it took me until, being very grown up and going through a lot to understand that. So when I see how open kids are to it, that's where I want to bring the work.
Thank you for that story. That's really beautiful. Out of the mouth of babes. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. So we are looking at trying to build a culture of empathy. So what's the importance of doing that at this time? Either one of you can answer that. What's the importance of it, and why is it needed?
Could I just interrupt here for a second? Mutima, could you just share your story of what empathy means to you as well?
Oh, sure.
We're all included in the panel, so.
Okay, good. So then you're next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's see. I've been actually in situations where I was always the odd person out. My father was in the service, and we traveled in Okinawa and in places like Casablanca when I was a little girl. And so as an African American, oftentimes I was the first person of color that people saw. And there was this feeling of connection that went beyond words, because we were in places where the language, we didn't know the language. And so I experienced an empathetic connection with people who were totally different from me and who I couldn't communicate with the English language. And that kind of intrigued me in terms of there's something beyond words. And so I think about the world as a place where there's an empathetic heart, and that all of us, if we move beyond the language and connect eye to eye and smile, that there's this rapport that happens. And I experienced that very, very young. And as I grew up, I got into the field of diversity. And I realized that in talking about valuing differences and how much differences are important to acknowledge, what really the core of my work has been in diversity about the development of self. And once one person begins to develop self, then there's an empathetic thing that excites oneself about other people. So it has really been, it's come up over and over and over throughout my career. And then, of course, when I met Edwin and he was running around asking everybody what they felt about empathy, I realized how important it is. And that's why I joined the empathy team, and I'm glad to be a part of this movement to build a culture of empathy, 1 million strong. So that's my story.
Well, great. Well, maybe I'll go into my story. Mine's more of a family-related story. I mean, something that is just kind of meaningful for me about empathy. And it's that growing up, I grew up in the 60s and was a teenager in the early 70s. And I was kind of, at that time, we had sort of a generation gap in the United States, the old kind of against the young against the old. And the family that I grew up in was kind of a conservative, evangelical, Baptist family. And kind of getting caught up in that generation gap, there was a lot of kind of conflict within our family, with me kind of being more liberal, more progressive, and, kind of arguing and that. And as I've kind of learned more about empathy, now when I get together with my folks, I just try to listen more to really get who they are. And just as I've been learning about empathy just in the last 3 years, I just found that the relationship with my family has gotten deeper just by just listening. And I remember just several months ago, I was sitting out in the backyard with my parents, and just they're always trying to convert me. They want me to kind of get back to religion, get back to Christianity, and so forth. But I just kind of listened. I said, okay, you're wanting, really kind of wanting, this is important to you. Religion is important to you, and just kind of listening and reflecting and empathizing with them. I actually got to see deeper into really who they are as what's really important to them. And I really heard that they see the world as a very greedy, selfish, self-centered kind of a world, and that people really don't care about each other. And kind of the only kind of way out of that to them is religion, because they just don't see that society is going to be caring. And I hadn't really seen that before. And then, and I said, well, it sounds like you think people are not empathetic to each other. They don't care about each other. And they said, that's right, So they said, and then they're saying, well, we really like the work you're doing. I mean, it's really, I see what you're doing. It's like, oh, yeah. So that was really, really nice. So for me, it's been kind of a deepening of personal connections. And I have a lot of stories, but that's one that's, I would say, just very meaningful for me, just to become, using empathy to get closer to members of my family.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I was taking the time to do a little bit of study, and historically, empathy is in every culture, and in traditional cultures, it really has been limited to the personal families, parent-child relationships with spouses. And because we're moving into an urban setting and people are living in large crowds, it seems to be that it's possible to really bring empathy. It's possible to think that it's time for empathy. So let's each of us take a moment to think about why is empathy important, and how do we, and from where you stand in your world, from your own personal worldview, how do we begin to build a culture of empathy? Who would like to share first? Ilene?
Can you repeat the two questions again?
Yes, I realize that I'm doing double questions, so it's kind of like, how do we build a culture of empathy? And from your personal place in the world, why is it important?
Okay. I think currently we're at a really interesting time in history.
Yes.
We're at a crossroads, and thinking about what's going on in Oakland tomorrow with the general strike and the whole 99% movement, it's interesting to think about. We live in a culture that has a monetary system and an economic system that by its nature creates inequality, inequity, pits people against each other. And so in a sense, we're fighting an uphill battle to create a culture of empathy when we're living in a monetary and economic system, and thus a political system based on that in its nature doesn't provide that for everyone. And so if we're wanting to make change, creating culture of empathy, which is to me learning empathy and acting from a place of empathy, is critical. There's no other way to do it. And so I just got lost. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, I really like what you were saying about, given the current affairs that are happening right now, and the changes that are needed from the monetary, political, economic situation, that empathy is one of the tools that can help shift things, and it's much needed to be shifted.
It is. And yesterday I heard a figure that since 2008 in Oakland alone, 30,000 homes have been foreclosed on. That's 30,000 families displaced from their homes. And in the climate that we live in, it's so easy to start creating stereotypes and enemy images about who those people are and why they put themselves in a situation to be evicted from their homes. And that's an error in thinking. That's one of those situations that is a result of the economic system that has been created here. So really coming together and speaking to each other and finding a way to connect in these times is critical. And to me, the place to begin doing that is with young kids in schools. These are skills that can be taught. These are skills that can be learned. They're not modeled for us very often in society. They're not modeled in corporate media. And we as adults who have been raised in certain ways with certain beliefs often don't model it for our youth. We've been raised in a really specific power structure. And if you go into schools and see the way we structure these institutions, it's about keeping people in line, about conformity of voice, about managing a classroom and keeping it quiet. And so it's not modeled in schools. So the trick is, how do we teach it then if it's not modeled? And I think we have to start with skills. There are skills that underlie empathy, listening skills and speaking skills and understanding our social history together that's brought us to where we are now. So it's imperative that it is taught across the board with youth, and I'm starting to think in teacher education is another part to infuse it that way, and change hopefully can happen as a result.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Sherry, how about you?
Well, I think a culture of empathy is going to be most inclusive, and I think among us, we humans on the planet, I think today or sometime this week we're supposed to reach 7 billion sometime in the next few months. Depends on but somewhere soon. And so there's a lot of us humans, and then also there's a lot of other life on the planet. And the air and the water and the land. I mean, there's so much. And I think if we're disconnected from the life in each other and all of what is, we're not going to have a very strong ability to be good stewards, of the earth, as well as of our own lives, and care for each other. So it's a super important fundamental thing. How do we do that? I mean, I think it's a question, I think, of worldview and then also of how we practice that. So for me, kind of an opening for that is it comes from a yoga practice, which allowed me to, and continues to allow me to, connect with myself and be more present in my own life. And that includes a meditation practice. In addition to asana and other yogic types of practices. So that's been a really important thing. I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but I'm saying that's an example for me of a way that I think contributes to a culture of empathy, is if that's as a doorway to self-connection. In terms of interacting with the rest of life, it's interesting that to me it keeps coming down to how do we make decisions. Building community and making decisions together. When I really resonate with what Ilene was saying about how we're raised, sort of our culture tends to have a system already in place. There's someone who's got more power than I do, and they say what to do, and then I get my choice or my option. I'm always at choice, but my options are comply or rebel. And I, for the most part, chose compliance, with a little bit of side rebellion that I hoped no one would see. And I think, I'd really like to see us have more options than that. So it means that we need to open up, be more inclusive in terms of, how we actually make decisions together, which is one of the things I'm really excited about the Occupy movement, is that they are taking on governance as a primary, or at least it's something that I'm hearing about in decision-making processes, using consensus model, which I think is much more inclusive and leads to more people being heard more deeply, and taking the time to do that, so that then when the thing is actually carried out, it's much more likely to be effective, and more people are really engaged with it, rather than sort of somebody at the top makes a decision and says do this, this, and this. There's an efficiency there, but we really, really lose our sense of community when that happens. So so decision making, and then the other piece is, what do we do when decisions become painful? When we're making a decision and it becomes really painful for us, there's usually something in there that's very meaningful. And in order to bring out that meaning, we might need a process that's a little bit more thought through and created by the community. And for me, so far, what I've really been intrigued by and excited by is restorative circles as a way to address conflict, and other restorative practices, which are maybe not quite as formal as a restorative circle, but restorative practices in general, because they also allow us to understand one another, that humanity I was talking about earlier, see the humanity in each other, and take responsibility for our experience, saying we're in a context right now and I'm contributing in some way, and we all do that, And it allows us, it's a kind of empathy, I think, that allows us then to make decisions together about what we're going to do with whatever this painful conflict is. And I also find it really interesting. So it's a restorative justice is one form of restorative practice that's really burgeoning in this country and other parts of the world. And it's interesting to me that the root of the word justice is huge, which is the same root of the word yoga. So there's a way that our justice system brings us together in a certain way, and we need to look at that. There's always a justice system. There's always a system in place, but we don't always think about it. So right now we have inherited a retributive justice system that has its own hallmarks, and I would really like to see a transformation to a conscious decision to use a restorative justice system, because I think it's going to create a world where we can really work together more effectively, and where it will work for everyone, and get us out of this 99%, 1% kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Edwin, how about you?
Mutima, in the question, I was kind of hearing that there's a notion that we have empathy for our immediate family and then empathy for our tribe, and there's this expanding notion of empathy. And that's kind of what is in that book, Empathic Civilization. And I'm a little skeptical about that view because it hasn't been my experience. I've seen plenty of families where there's kind of like a lack of empathy within the family, and there's like more empathy for someone outside of the family. I spent 10 years traveling around the world in all kinds of different cultures, in Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, India, Afghanistan, China, Russia, and all that. And everywhere I went, there were people who reached out and connected with me. So I see that sense of, and there's also that notion that, through history we're becoming more maybe empathic. But there were explorers like Marco Polo who went and, traveled across, half the world to China from Italy. And I'm sure he connected with people all along the way. So for me, what that says is that the empathy, we have that basic human capacity for empathy. It's there. And, part of it is getting away from this sense of fear that there's these others outside of us. We used to hear that, I hear here in America, I hear this constant drumbeat of, it's a dangerous world out there, we have to be afraid. And I think it's kind of addressing that fear that there are, caring people all over the world that reach out. And, I just remember being in Indonesia. It's like people just wanted to include me in their families. They would see that I was kind of like alone by myself. And they say, oh, come, have a meal with us and all that. So I think it's just seeing, at the basics, seeing our common humanity with people all over the globe and, kind of addressing these fears. Somewhere I've heard the quote, an enemy is someone whose story we haven't heard. So, that's my timer, huh?
No, go ahead.
No, that was it. That's the main thing. But I'm also, that's so that's one thing. That's kind of a, for me, a big point about building a culture of empathy is just seeing the humanity of people all over the world. That we basically have that basic sense of empathy, and it's not like restricted, to our family or just our immediate friends. I'm sure there's people that go on vacation, they go to the Bahamas or wherever, or Europe, and they meet people who they're very deeply connected with, and they say, so it's just that there's that capacity there, and I'm a little concerned about that worldview that is kind of, that the empathic civilization is kind of that rings of empathy notion that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I've had a similar experience with traveling where people been open and connecting. And so I think I shared that in my opening statement. But I also feel that um, people become more empathetic when they become more self-aware, and self-awareness starts with um, uh, being able to reflect on what's going on with oneself. And so I think that one of the things that I've been looking forward to is, and I think that I can say from my perspective, is that the world, let me say the United States, when we when people voted for Obama, I felt before the election that the United States wasn't ready for that. That there wasn't enough empathy. There wasn't enough connection around the racial divide for um, America to actually vote in a black president. So when that happened, I was completely overwhelmed. And the first thing that came to my mind is that there is more empathy and more connection than I had imagined. Because, as a person who does diversity work, every time you gather a group of people together, it's like starting from ground zero, like uh, with the basic principles over and over. And I had a sense that it could go on forever. And so with the United States voting in an African American man for the first time as president, I realized that it is because of technology and the new ways that we're connecting, the internet, all the social networks, that there is more empathy. And so I kind of think that this whole, Occupy Wall Street is a kind of an empathetic movement that is really about joining people who have lost their homes and are looking for jobs and been unemployed. It's a cry for the people in the United States to say we need to take care of ourselves. But I'm also hoping that there's going to be an empathy muscle that is developing. And for the people who have decided to march out now, to realize that there are other people who have been marginalized and in the position of the 99, the position that the 99 find themselves in now, have been in that because there has not been a culture of empathy around people of color, indigenous people here in the United States. So that makes sense?
Yeah, so were you saying that initially there's empathy, you have to develop kind of a self-awareness for empathy?
Right.
And that the empathy needs to expand to parts of society that haven't been empathized with?
Yes. Yes.
I
And
think,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it reminds me, it's about social responsibility, and this phrase, personal responsibility, I think is used in ways that are oppressive sometimes. But the word responsibility, the ability to choose our response in a situation, to choose a response that is life-giving and supportive of the life that exists around us, whether it's the person next to us, the plant, the animal, Mother Earth herself. But it's that's where freedom is, between stimulus and response, and our ability to choose a response. And what you said reminded me of that.
Good. That's beautifully well said. Thank you for saying that.
We've lost Sherry. Are you still there, Sherry? We're not seeing your video.
Okay. Yeah, I can see my video, not a couple of years. So my internet, my wireless had gone down. So
okay. So
but I'm here.
Yeah, you're here. If you want to try stopping and starting your video again, that might.
Okay, I'll try that. Did that work?
Not yet.
No. Okay.
But maybe it'll pop in.
Yeah. I'll try again.
So while we're trying to get the video going, let's, as a team, decide where the conversation should go next. I think it's been a really rich conversation. And what would we like to talk about in the next 15 minutes that we have together?
I'm wondering about, it seems like a lot of what we talked about is this idea that we're nice all the time, or that we're acting a certain way, like in an altruistic way all the time, where I wonder if it would be good to bring in something about empathy is also about healing breaches. And healing breaches in relationships is often where the deepest connection happens, and what Sherry was talking about, restorative practice, and how that plays in. So that's one thing I came up for me.
So it's about empathy and conflict?
Okay.
Yeah, that we're not talking about, you know, people will say, oh, kumbaya, and, you know, whatever they're going to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about that. It's about, yeah, how we connect through disagreement and conflict and pain.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about a lot. And have seen and have some, you know, experience in schools environments as well as others where I've seen real shifts in moving through conflict, walking toward conflict and moving through it. Yeah, rather than avoiding it.
And it's like Edwin said, it's about hearing stories, right? Sharing stories somehow.
Right, the power of the story, and really what's meaningful to us is what comes out. That's apparently this is something that we tend to do in North America. I'm not sure because it's my culture, so I think we tend to be blind to whatever our own thing is because we're so used to it. But that we tell stories in order to share what's meaningful to us or to say how we are right now. So
yeah, I've done some mediation training, and it seemed that the whole mediation about bringing disputants together was about getting them to empathize with each other. So I've seen mediation as like the core of mediation to be empathy. If you can create an environment where both sides or multiple sides can empathize with each other. So that does seem to be really a big, rich area for empathy, is to use it for conflict resolution. Yay, there you are, Sherry. You just popped up again.
And go ahead, Sherry. Were you going to say something? Okay, well, welcome back.
I'm just patiently waiting. I don't know what the computer did, but it works. Yay.
So one of the things that I have a concern about is that, yes, empathy does work in conflict resolution when you can get two parties together and give them equal time to voice their opinions and make sure that they've heard each other. But what about structural racism? What about institutionalized racism? There isn't a person to get to talk about it. And so what I believe is that as we begin to really sense the places where empathy is needed, then there's going to be a chance for people who have the self-awareness, who are clear about what they need and want, is other people of different cultures need and want it also. There'll be a place to take some action, and to really shift the mindset around who are the aliens, who are the other person, and to begin to say that we are, we need to build a humanity, and that as we move into the 21st century in these urban environments, that there are some things that that we've taken for granted that are only okay for certain people to have, and that we're going to have to open that door so that everybody can have the opportunity to survive. If the monetary system is going to stay with the dollar, then there needs to be an equal distribution with the dollar, so that people can buy what's necessary: food, clothing, shelter. Unless we're going to move into a society where all that's going to be automatic, and we are not there at all. There are so many people who have lost their homes. What I heard that the statistic, 30,000 in the last year in Oakland who been foreclosed on. But there's probably another 30,000 who will never even be able to think about buying a home, who don't have the security of a home, who are actually homeless. I don't know what the number of homelessness is. And homelessness, being homeless sometimes doesn't stem from the fact that people just don't want a home, but that they're cut out of the economic means to even secure a home for themselves. So I'm looking for an empathy muscle that's going to be built, that is big enough to really begin to reflect where the disparities are. And it's more than a personal reflection, but a collective consciousness shift. And that's what I'm counting on, is that that this the kind of Occupy Wall Street is the beginning of a movement that's going to build empathy in a way that it's going to be inclusive. And so I feel like even with this, 99% and 1%, there's going to have to be a place where the 1% gets to be included so that we can solve the problem together. And
Yes.
and when people are in anger and pain, it's hard to include the other. And right now it's the 1% rich. But if we're going to ask for equal distribution, they're going to have to come to the table sooner or later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Otherwise, it's more of the same, just with different, rearranging the roles. So I'm wondering. I heard you say something about structural or institutionalized racism, and I'm wondering if I could respond to that a little bit.
Please do.
With thought, it's more just I wanted to speak to I think one of the challenges that's there that maybe some of us don't always see, and I one thing I've heard in doing the work with restorative justice is that most conflicts, if not all, at some point, if you go all the way out to the context in which the conflict is occurring, it goes back to colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
Into the structure, the context in which we find ourselves, and so I think one of the biggest challenges is cultural. How do I say? Some of us, like myself, I was raised as a white person with certain ideas about how you fix things, and they actually get in the way of what I think is actually empathy. Such as, I have a good idea, I think I'll bring it into a community and tell them all about it so that they can all get fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm finding in my work is that, from my perspective, is that I need to do a whole lot more listening, and which includes to the very people that are struggling the most. And to also recognize that we're all contained in that. There's a way that everyone is impacted by colonialism as well, and that we need to do a whole lot of listening and understanding each other, which I think it really includes listening to the 1%, whoever that is. I'm curious if anybody considers themselves to be part of the 1%. That would be an interesting thing to find out. But it's listening. It's a lot of listening first. And that empathic listening, and recognizing the structure in which we find ourselves has an impact on everyone. So I'm wondering, Mutima, what you think about when you hear that, because I was stimulated by what you said, and I'm curious how it lands for you to hear what I just said.
I'm in agreement with what you're saying, and I think that it's one of the reasons why I think that building a culture of empathy is important, is that um, we are living on kind of like automatic, and our history really hasn't been told to us in a correct way. So we're living off of assumptions and stereotypes and prejudices that automatically exclude people. When in my diversity work, when I'm dealing with individuals, almost to the person, every individual has a heart and wants to include other people and are concerned. But when we move from the individual to the collective, which is the collective consciousness, which history has set up, then we see that there's the blocks. Like, what people were really to take a moment and look at where their investments are, to see that in the United States, the prison industry, industrial complex is the fastest growing industry, and to see that their investments are really plugged into that, they would be appalled. But because we live on automatic, and we're just thinking about, well, I need enough money to retire on, to go on vacation on, to do this on, people are not checking about, well, where are they plugged in at? And so when people start to develop enough self-awareness to be concerned, and not just about, I need to get mine, I need to worry about my retirement, I need to do this, I need to do that for me and my family, then the awakening comes and say, well, where am I plugged in? Where, this is a very strange analogy, but this is the one that I use, where there's blood on my hands.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Where am I plugged in? And that kind of review, I think, is going to come out of the empathy. I believe that when people develop their empathy muscles, that it's like a baby step, but that there's an empathy consciousness that then begins to reflect about, oh, well, we need to do this because we're destroying the earth. We need to do this because we're poisoning our water. We need to do this because we're directly supporting the pipeline to prison, which is, in some cases, the lack of education. So we can change that because we can provide quality education and stop the pipeline.
Yeah. Part of the challenge I think that we're going to face in this new sort of direction we're trying to move socially is, when you look at say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so on that bottom level are meeting our survival needs, a home, food, shelter. And when such a huge proportion of our society doesn't have access to those basic human needs, they are living in a constant state of stress, which creates a neurological, physiological state of being that actually transforms our brains and doesn't allow us to reach those higher levels of thinking, the higher parts of our brain where empathy lives. So when we're looking at a culture where there's so much inequity, the haves and the have-nots, the haves seem to want to believe in the myth of, social or self-responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't be angry. Why are you angry all the time? Be empathetic. And if those people would just change and, come along with the plan, everything would be okay. So it's when we're talking about empathy in an inequitable society, I think there's that challenge. And we saw it at Occupy Oakland, where a lot of anger was acted out at what the police chose to do. And that anger is going to come out before we can get to empathy. And we need to be really careful that we're not labeling people and putting them in little boxes because they're angry and have lived without, access to what the 1% has had.
Yeah, I think a shift of consciousness about what we value in our lives is happening through the Occupy Wall Street. So, the anger might now be because I can't have what the 1% has, so I'm really mad about it. But I think we're at the brink of seeing that more houses, more cars, more things is not going to save the planet.
Well,
No, and not so much that, but we make those things about power, and we use it to divide people and distract people from true human support and connection. So I don't think what I said came out quite right.
No, I think that I think that what you said was really right on. And I'm saying then the next layer of it is that the shift in consciousness needs to be about what it is that saying that we want. Because if we're all fighting because we want to be the 1%.
Right.
well, I wanted to go back a little bit from what I was hearing you initially say is that that we need to look at the structures, like the social structures within society. There's kind of these patterns of behavior and organization that we have that might not be maximizing empathy within the very structure. For example, you can have a meeting where there's one person talking and all the seats are lined up and everybody's looking at the one person talking. And is that system kind of maximizing empathy within that room? Would circles, small discussions actually work to maximize empathy? Because it's not like an on and off switch. It's I kind of see it more like a dimmer switch that we can raise the value, the experience of empathy. So it's like looking at the social structures that we're living in and how can we modify them seems to be kind of what I was kind of hearing you say, that there's kind of like structural inequality, structural empathy kind of in the system. And then I was hearing Sherry say that maybe one way to deal with this is the actual listening. It's like it's listening more to people. It's like not going into an environment and then saying, well, I've got the answers, I'm going to fix you, I'm going to, I know how things should be. It's about, I'm here to empathically listen to what are your feelings and values and needs and what's important to you as kind of one way. And in terms of Occupy Oakland, I've been kind of imagining having an empathy tent there. And I was imagining like a banners all around, like empathy, on the side of the tent, or have it like 100% empathy, something like that. So it's to really make that point that everyone is included in a space because there's a lot of pain and anger and resentment kind of bottled up, now. There, especially in Oakland, that I've seen.
Yeah,
hearing that, I think about when something is true, it's true in terms of being aligned, not in sense of true or false in terms of facts. That when there's a quote by Martin Shaw. He says, "When something true enters the room, and all falls silent." So there's a way that when we align, we connect, we realign, and that's what restorative means, is to restore connection or to restore alignment. Then that's a container. That could be the empathy tent. That's the container in which I'll be able to see the blood on my hands in a way that I can then do something with, and not just sit there with guilt or defensiveness or shame or whatever else. So I think that's where empathy is so important, that we create these structures, these containers within which we can actually see where we are and be together. It's not necessarily always about nice or feeling good even.
Right.
But it's a powerful container that can hold us as we make decisions about what we want to do going forward.
Well, I hope that this panel discussion, or this circle discussion, is one of those containers so that we can actually bring up these topics and start exploring them. So I'm quite excited about this kind of circle that we're doing here.
I'm excited about Sherry's sort of new tweak on the idea of empathy as truth, where things align. So you're not having conflict and anger, and you're also not having some happy land that's unrealistic, but it's a place of stillness. Almost.
Yes, if as it's not, and it's not to avoid conflict or anger, but it's a way to meet it and be with it, and that then allows it to reach its fullness, so that then the stillness is there. You know,
it's almost like it reaches a point of true balance where everybody's needs are equally valued, every person is equally valued, and it's alignment. There's something really rich in that. Thank you.
There is. It's a beautiful concept to hold out during these tumultuous times. And I want to thank each of you for being a part of the panel discussion on how to build a culture of empathy. As we've seen, we could probably talk for another 3 hours, and every comment spins us off into another realm. So this is a very big topic. And I thank you for your time and your insights today. And I'm wondering if any closing remarks from anybody before we sign off.
Well, I'm really excited about this. This is our very first panel, and we've been kind of trying it out, and I feel it's been working out really well. So I'm quite excited about this, and we'll have a bit of a debriefing after this panel, and set up our next panel, our next topic. So I'm really excited about it. Thanks to everybody for taking part, and Mutima for moderating it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
So we all hanging up? Oh.
Okay, unless you want to debrief, not debrief, but to have your closing statement. Anybody? Any closing comment?
Sherry's would have been a great way to wrap it up. The alignment, that could be a great ending.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
I think so.
And Mutima, I had a sense that there was something that you wanted to say right around the time that I said that, and I want that to be heard. Okay.
No, I'm fine. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, then we're officially ended, and
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.